I never expected my ex-wife's anniversary party to end with her new husband begging me not to pull my investment from the restaurant group that secretly kept his law firm afloat. When he handed me an apron and told me to start on the appetizers, I smiled, set it on the counter, and introduced myself to his senior partners as the sole owner of the Ember Group. The look on his face was worth every quiet year I'd spent building something he never believed I could. But let me back up. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 49 years old, and I cook for a living. That's how my ex-wife Claire still describes it to people, or so my son tells me. He cooks for a living, said with the particular flatness of someone who has decided the subject is closed. I've learned not to take it personally. Claire has always needed her version of the story to stay intact. I understand that now in a way I couldn't when we were married. We met in Chicago in 2001. She was a first-year associate at Hargrove and Lind, running on 4 hours of sleep and gas station coffee. I was working the line at a mid-range Italian place on North Clark, saving everything I made, studying every cookbook I could get my hands on, and dreaming about something I couldn't fully describe yet but felt completely certain about. We were both 25. We were both ambitious in ways that looked nothing alike. For 7 years, it worked. She made partner track while I moved up from sous chef to head chef at a new American bistro in Lincoln Park that got a mention in Chicago Magazine. We had our son Lucas in 2005. For a while, we were building something together. Then, slowly, we weren't. The divorce wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no discovered betrayals, no single moment of rupture. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse. Claire sat across from me at our kitchen table one evening in 2008 and told me, very calmly, that she needed a partner whose trajectory made sense. Those were her exact words. Whose trajectory makes sense. She wasn't cruel about it. She genuinely believed she was being practical. A chef's income was inconsistent. The restaurant industry had a failure rate she could cite from memory. She had made partner by then. Her world was moving forward in ways she could chart and defend. Mine, in her estimation, was a beautiful dead end. I didn't argue. I signed the papers, found a small apartment in Wicker Park, and 3 weeks later started developing the concept for the restaurant I'd been sketching in notebooks for years. The divorce settlement gave Claire the house and primary custody of Lucas, who was 3. I got weekends, holidays, and the absolute certainty that I was going to build something that mattered. Not to prove her wrong. That's what people always assume, and it was never true. I needed to build it because it was the only thing that had ever felt fully mine. The failure rate she cited meant nothing to me. I had already accepted that I might lose. What I couldn't accept was never trying. The first restaurant, Ember, opened in 2011 inches a narrow storefront on West Randolph. 38 seats. No investors. Every dollar I had. I worked the line 7 nights a week for the first year. Slept 4 hours a night, and paid my 2 cooks before I paid myself. There were 3 months in 2012 where I genuinely wasn't sure we'd survive. Then Jonathan Gold wrote 4 paragraphs about us in the Tribune and the phone didn't stop ringing. By 2015, we had a second location. By 2018, 3 restaurants in Chicago and 1 in Nashville. By 2021, the Ember Group had 7 properties across 4 cities and a valuation that made my old accountant laugh when he saw the number. I hired a real accountant. I kept cooking. Lucas grew up splitting his time between his mother's house in Lincoln Park and my apartment above the original Ember location, which I'd converted into a loft after buying the building. He was a serious kid, thoughtful, with Claire's precision and what I hoped was my instinct for when to trust his gut. By the time he turned 18, he'd worked every station in my kitchen, not because I pushed him, but because he wanted to. He had a talent for it that made my chest ache with a pride I couldn't always articulate. Claire remarried in 2017. His name was Richard Holt. Corporate attorney, recently made equity partner at the same firm where Claire was now a managing partner. The word around their social circle, according to Lucas, was that Richard was politically connected, aggressively well-dressed, and deeply interested in being perceived as someone who had achieved things. He and Claire had met at a charity gala. He had a son from a previous marriage, grown, living in Seattle. He drove a car that was worth more than my first restaurant build-out. Lucas was 12 when they got married. He came home from the wedding and told me that Richard had given a toast in which he described himself as a man who rewarded excellence and had no patience for people who wasted their potential. He said it looking at my son, who was 12 years old. Lucas had memorized it. He has a talent for remembering the things people say when they think it doesn't matter. I told Lucas that some people confuse confidence with wisdom and left it at that. I had no interest in putting Richard Holt in my son's mind as someone worth resenting. Over the years, I encountered Richard at school events, holidays, the occasional handoff. He was the kind of man who shook your hand while looking slightly over your shoulder, as though the more interesting conversation was happening elsewhere. He knew I owned a restaurant. Claire had apparently told him that much, though Lucas confirmed she had never mentioned the scope of it, the awards, the expansion, the profiles in food and wine in the Times. To Richard, I was a middle-aged line cook who had stumbled into owning a small place. The kind of man whose presence at a private school Christmas concert required a brief, charitable acknowledgement before he moved on to someone worth talking to. I didn't correct the impression. I had nothing to prove to Richard Holt. The invitation arrived in October. Claire and Richard's 10th anniversary party, the last Saturday of November, at their home in Winnetka. Lucas was 22 by then, working in my Nashville kitchen as a junior sous chef, and he called me the night he got his own invitation to ask whether I was going. Should I? I asked. Mom actually wants you there, he said. I think she told Richard you two are on good terms and now she has to prove it. Are we on good terms? You're on good terms with her, he said. She's complicated. I RSVP'd yes. I'm still not entirely sure why. Lucas being there was part of it. Some version of curiosity was probably part of it too. The same instinct that makes you glance at something you know is going to be uncomfortable just to confirm your own equilibrium. I told myself I was going for my son, and I mostly believed it. The drive to Winnetka took 40 minutes on a cold Saturday evening in November. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought for the James Beard dinner 2 years earlier and said nothing to Lucas when he called to check that I was still coming. Their house was a colonial on a street with mature oaks, every window lit, cars lining the driveway and spilling onto the road. Claire had always known how to create an atmosphere. I'll give her that. Lucas was waiting at the door when I arrived. He was taller than me now by an inch, his dark hair pushed back, wearing a blazer he'd clearly borrowed from someone with better taste than he normally showed. Fair warning, he said quietly as I came inside. Richard's been telling people you're catering. I stopped. Excuse me? He told the Hendersons and the Blakes that you own a little restaurant downtown and that he called in a favor. Lucas kept his voice neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. I didn't correct him because I didn't know how you wanted to play it. I looked at my son for a moment. Where's your mother? Kitchen. Panicking about the canapes. I'll find her. The living room was full. 40, maybe 50 people. The kind of gathering where the men's watches cost more than most people's annual salary and the conversations moved in tight circles of mutual professional interest. I recognized 2 federal judges, a city alderman, and at least 3 faces from the financial pages. Richard's world. The architecture of a man who measured his life in the quality of his contacts. I found Claire near the kitchen doorway, looking exactly as Lucas had described. She was 51. Elegant in a way that had always required real effort, her dark hair shorter than I remembered, wearing a dress that I suspected had taken considerable time to select. When she saw me, she smiled with what looked like genuine relief, which surprised me. You came, she said. I said I would. She touched my arm briefly. Thank you. It means a lot to Lucas that you're here. A pause. To me too. I started to respond when Richard appeared at her shoulder. He was a large man, broad through the chest, with the kind of silver-templed hair that photographed well. His smile arrived with the precision of something practiced. Marcus. He extended his hand. Glad you could make it. I hope the drive wasn't too bad. Not at all, I said. Good, good. He glanced toward the kitchen with the air of a man consulting a clipboard. I actually wanted to grab you before the evening got too far along. Claire mentioned you're comfortable in a professional kitchen, and our caterer had to reduce staff last minute. I thought maybe you could jump in for a few hours, help plate the appetizers. I'd compensate you fairly, of course. Claire went very still. It would actually be a real favor, Richard continued, warming to the idea now. These are important people, and the presentation matters. I figure it's your wheelhouse. My wheelhouse, I repeated. You know what I mean. This is what you do, right? Cook? The room within earshot had gone slightly quieter. I recognized the particular quality of that silence. People pretending not to listen while listening completely. Richard, Claire said quietly. What? He runs a restaurant. This is a compliment. He looked at me again. Aprons in the pantry if you want to get settled before the first course. I had a choice in that moment. I have thought about it many times since, the precise architecture of it. I could have deflected. I could have found a graceful exit from the conversation. I could have let it go the way I'd let so many of these small dismissals go over the years because none of them had ever cost me anything that mattered. But I thought about my son in the doorway watching. I thought about the 4 years I'd spent sleeping 6 hours a night to build something I believed in. I thought about Lucas telling me that Richard had looked at a 12-year-old boy at a wedding and questioned his potential. I thought about the apron in the pantry. I appreciate the offer, I said, keeping my voice easy. But I'm here as a guest. You might want to let the Ember Group catering team handle the kitchen. They're fully staffed tonight. Richard blinked. The Ember Group? That's my company. I glanced around the room casually. Though I noticed the Hendersons are here. David Henderson manages the pension fund that holds a 19% stake in our Nashville and Atlanta properties. He probably didn't realize he was coming to a party catered by his own portfolio. The silence around us had become total. Richard's practiced smile didn't fall so much as lose its footing. I'm sorry, what? The Ember Group. 7 restaurants across Chicago, Nashville, Atlanta, and Denver. We were in the Times last spring. 2 Michelin stars as of this year. I said it the way I might describe the weather. Factual, uninterested in drama. I don't often cook at private events anymore, but I'm happy to introduce you to my executive chef if there are concerns about the appetizer situation. Claire had a look on her face I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was the look she used to get when she realized mid-argument that she had been wrong and was still deciding what to do with that information. Richard said nothing. His mouth was slightly open. Lucas appeared at my elbow holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one without looking at his stepfather. Dad, he said, and his voice had something in it I recognized as deliberate steadiness. Senator Callaway's chief of staff was asking about the new Denver location. I told him you'd be happy to talk. I accepted the wine. Thanks, son. I walked with Lucas toward the fireplace end of the room, leaving Richard standing at the kitchen door with an expression I had no interest in cataloging further. The rest of the evening rearranged itself around this new information the way rooms do when something shifts in them. The Hendersons were warm and engaged. A woman from the board of the Chicago Restaurant Association recognized me and spent 20 minutes talking about the Ember Group's culinary apprenticeship program. We'd launched the prior year for young people aging out of foster care. 2 of Richard's law partners turned out to have eaten at our flagship on separate occasions and remembered it vividly, which they mentioned to Richard within his hearing. Richard circled the room performing damage control with the practiced efficiency of a man who had survived courtroom reversals before. He laughed too easily. He touched Claire's back too often. I watched him work the crowd and felt something I hadn't expected, something close to pity. He had constructed a very careful identity, and I had done nothing more than exist truthfully inside his party. That this had dismantled him said something about the fragility of what he'd built. Claire found me near the end of the evening, after the dinner, when people were beginning to make their gracious exits. Lucas was across the room talking to one of Richard's younger associates, gesturing in the way he did when he was explaining something about food. You could have told him, she said. She wasn't accusatory, just tired. He didn't ask. She was quiet for a moment, watching the room. Richard tells people things about you. About what you do, who you are. He's been doing it since we got married. I know. She looked at me then. And you never said anything. What would I have said? She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, Lucas showed me your James Beard Award last year. I didn't know you'd won one. I didn't know about the 2nd Michelin star. A pause. I've been following your career, Marcus. From a distance. I just didn't know how to say that without it meaning something it doesn't. What doesn't it mean? She shook her head. I was right to leave. We wanted different lives. That part was true. She looked toward where Lucas was laughing at something across the room. But I was wrong about what your life would be. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 20 years. I drove home through the dark and cold of November, the highway mostly empty at that hour, the Chicago skyline rising ahead of me like something I'd built myself. Which in small ways I had. 3 months later, I was in my office at the original Ember location reviewing the lease on a potential Portland property when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved anymore, but recognized immediately. I answered. Marcus. Richard's voice had lost its courtroom authority. He sounded like a man who had been talking to a problem for too long without solving it. I'm going to cut to it. The Callaway campaign is putting together a fundraiser. High profile, significant donor list. They want a Chicago venue with a certain profile. A pause. They want Ember. I leaned back in my chair. I know the optics aren't ideal, he continued, which was a lawyer's way of acknowledging an entire evening without naming it. But this would be good for both of us. The visibility for your brand, Richard. He stopped. Tell Senator Callaway's team to reach out through our events director. Her name is Patricia. I'll make sure she knows to expect the call. Another pause. And do it soon. November books fast. Silence on the line. Then, thank you. Of course. I meant it without irony. That was the strange part. The victory, if that's what it was, had happened months ago at his party in Winnetka. This was just business. We hung up and I sat for a moment in the familiar noise of my kitchen below me, the clatter and rhythm of a service getting underway, a sound I had chosen over every safer option 20 years ago and would choose again without hesitation. Lucas called that evening from Nashville. He'd heard through Claire about the Callaway fundraiser. She told you? I asked. She tells me things now. He paused. I think she's processing a lot. Give her time. She asked me if I was happy in the kitchen. He said it carefully, the way he'd learned to present information he wasn't sure how I'd receive. What did you tell her? I told her I'm exactly where I want to be. A beat. She said that sounded familiar. We talked for another hour about the Nashville menu changes, a new prep cook he thought had real instinct, and whether we should expand the apprenticeship program into a second city. By the time we hung up, I was at the piano I kept in the corner of the loft, not playing anything, just resting my hands on the keys. I'd bought it years ago on impulse, some half-formed idea of learning something new. I never learned to play it properly. But I kept it there anyway, a reminder that not everything has to be completed to be worth having. Some people would call what happened at that party in Winnetka revenge. I understand why. The structure of it has that shape, the underestimated man, the arrogant husband, the moment of quiet devastation. I've told the story to a few close friends and watched their faces move through satisfaction on my behalf. But that's not how it felt from inside. What it felt like was simply being seen accurately for the first time by someone who had decided who I was before they looked. The satisfaction wasn't in his embarrassment. It was in the fact that I hadn't done anything except show up as myself. I hadn't inflated my story or prepared a confrontation or waited for the right moment to correct the record. I had just lived my life for 20 years in the way that felt true and walked into his house and been exactly that. The apron was still in the pantry. I hope he put it to good use. The Ember Group opened its Portland location in April. Lucas flew up for the soft opening and worked the line with me for the first 3 nights, the way we had at every new opening since Nashville. He is a better cook than I was at his age, which is everything I could want for him. He has Claire's precision and something else, something that doesn't come from either of us, a kind of generosity in how he thinks about feeding people, what they need, what the meal is supposed to do for them beyond the food itself. I watched him plate a dish on the 3rd night, his hands moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what they're doing and has stopped needing to prove it, and thought about everything that led to that moment. The apartment in Wicker Park. The first Ember lease. The 3 months in 2012 when I couldn't see the other side. The signed papers on a kitchen table in 2008. I don't carry regret about any of it. Not even the years when I doubted myself in the dark of a nearly empty restaurant at 2 in the morning with a lease payment due and a menu that wasn't quite right yet. Those years belong to the thing I built. They're part of what it's made of. Claire texted me the week the Portland Review ran in the Times. It said 2 words. Congratulations, Marcus. I read it twice and typed back thank you and meant it without reservation. There are people who walk away from you, and you spend years angry about it. And there are people who walk away from you, and eventually you understand they were right, that what you wanted were different things, that the leaving was not a wound but a door. I am not a sentimental man. I have spent my adult life in kitchens, which are among the least romantic environments imaginable, all fire and urgency and the pressure of things that will not wait. But I know what my son sounds like when he says he's exactly where he wants to be. That's the composition. Everything else is just noise.